All right, everybody, welcome back to GLAGjr BITS. This is Carson Latat, graduate of Michigan State University, Cornell University, and now a graduate associate at Penn State University. And I'm joined here today, as always, by Thomas Gable.
Yep, Thomas Gable here. I'm an undergraduate student studying agricultural and extension education, so I'd be a high school ag teacher in the future. I have minors in international agriculture and sustainability leadership, and I've been working with the Global Teach Ag Network as an intern for the past 3 years.
And we're here to talk today about food. And no, this is not going to be a cooking podcast. No, this is not going to be a farming podcast, although some of the topics we're going to touch on are going to touch on both those things. But we're going to talk about food security in particular. And we're going to give you the basics of food security. And we are assuming that most of the people listening to this podcast are people in high school, right? Those of you that are in grades 9 through 12, ages 13 to 18, we're talking to you. Anybody else listening, you are more than welcome to keep on listening and keep attending. But we're gonna speak to high schoolers here, and we're gonna try to give you guys the basics, right? The how-to think about food security and how to talk about food security. Thomas, do you know anything about this at all?
A little bit. I've dabbled in it from here to there. But in all seriousness, before we dive into these concepts, and we have a guest speaker that will be joining us later on.
Yes, we do.
We want to give you some definitions to roll with just to get some baseline understanding in there so you know exactly what terminology we're using throughout the rest of this podcast episode so we don't leave anybody confused. So to dive in, according to the FAO, which is the Food and Agriculture Organization, food security is the state of having reliable access to a sufficient quantity of affordable, nutritious food. So let's break down a couple of these terms here.
All right.
So affordable. That simply means that people are able to purchase enough food to feed themselves. But additionally, if they have a family, that means each and every single person in their family every single day has enough calories, they have enough nutrients, all of that to support a healthy lifestyle and healthy life functions. And then breaking down the second part of that, whenever we say nutritious, that simply means that it's food that provides the macro and micronutrients that the human body needs to function.
There we go. And it doesn't just mean like celery, right? When I say I'm eating nutritious food, doesn't mean that I'm just chomping on a celery stick. It's any of those foods that have essential nutrients and vitamins that we need to actually keep our bodies running, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to keep that rolling, and we're going to talk about calories. So everybody listening to this podcast has seen a food label at some point. You've seen the giant word on the back of that label, calories, right? It's supposed to catch your eye. So that way you decide whether or not you want to eat that thing based on how many calories are in it.
They can be mad intimidating sometimes. They kind of scare me. And I get scared. I look at the Big Mac and I'm like, what is this calorie thing? And spooky.
Yeah.
It's not October, but it's spooky season when you're looking at calorie labels.
Yeah. And especially when you get into 4 digits, right? It's one thing if I'm looking at something and I'm in the hundreds. I'm like, okay, I can drink or I can eat this and be fine. If it's going into 4 digits, I'm like, all right, this might be all I eat today, But let's talk about that more specifically, because like why do I feel weird when I see a 4-digit calorie label on the back of a food item? And depending on how you're looking at it, it's not a bad thing. But let's chat a little bit more about it. So technically speaking, a calorie is a measurement of energy, right? And so that's how the term started back a while ago when scientists were first looking at what made the human body run. And so it really started as a measurement of energy. And just like we talk about electricity, these calories were kind of the same thing. And there are calories for physics, right? We can talk about a calorie in a physics classroom. And then there's calories in nutrition. And so today we're going to talk specifically about that nutritional calorie. If this was a physics podcast, we'd probably lose half our audience right now. But so instead, we're going to keep it as a food podcast to keep you all lured back in here. So, and I should note that when we talk about calories here in the nutrition side, we're actually talking about calorie with a capital C or kilocalories, right? So the original calorie definition, it was a lowercase c. It's actually a really, really tiny unit of energy. There's tinier units out there, but one lowercase c calorie is not really much energy for me to do anything. I need at least one capital C, 1 kilocalorie, and that would be 1,000 of those little calories would be a kilocalorie. So according to Live Science, what Americans see on a food label is actually a kilocalorie. So when you see that capital C calorie, that's actually what that really means is 1,000 of those little calories. And it actually converts over to a kilojoule pretty easily as well, in case some of you are on that physics side, you've heard of joules before. And so when the US Department of Agriculture says that one medium-sized apple contains 95 calories, it actually contains 95 kilocalories. You probably never need to worry about that again, but just, just so you know, that's what that actually means. So Thomas, where do we go from here?
No, let's dive into some more of how do we calculate the calories that we need. Like you gave us a really good definition of what a calorie is. Well, what does that mean for us?
Right.
So we know that people are very different. All over the world, we're very different from individual to individual. I'm very different than people I went to high school with, than my best friends in a bunch of different ways. And we're different in the fact that we need different levels of calories. You explained that there are measurements of energy. We all need different amounts of energy to go about our daily lives.
So and for the people listening at home, I'm about twice the size of Thomas. So if you want to go ahead and start to infer that Thomas and I need different amounts of calories in order for our bodies to function, you start think of it as like how much fuel you got to put in a BMW versus a semi truck. So there you go, people at home.
That is your lovely analogy for the day via Thomas and Carson.
That's one.
Well, that's throwing me off a little bit because usually I'm like Thomas the train, Thomas the tank engine. Like, what are we talking about here? Like, come on.
No. Thomas the Tesla. How about that? Thomas the Tesla.
There we go.
Tesla need?
I am speedy.
Yeah, there you go.
But on that topic of being speedy, which once I played like wide receiver back in high school, I'm a speedy athletic guy.
There we go. All state wide receiver here in Pennsylvania.
Yep. My athletic prowess peaked on the JV football team. But there's a bunch of online calculators that weigh multiple factors to figure out how many calories you need in a day. So some of these factors are your size, your sex, activity level, could also be age depending on where you look. And then they're not perfect. I mean, they take those factors in. They also require you to be truthful on those to actually factor it in. And some of them account for things such as height and weight and a little bit too to try to make it a little bit more accurate.
Yeah.
But on some of the ones that I've looked at recently, I need about 2,300 calories a day-ish to maintain my body weight. So, Carson, what kind of range do you have?
If we were going to go relatively speaking, I'm probably looking at more like 5,000 calories. But according to these calculators, and I assume I was truthful. I don't know. It's been a while since I did that calculator. Lots changed since then. I have become more sedentary and I eat more cookies. But at that time, I did the calculation. I need about 2,600. So, what does that mean, right? I need 2,600 calories for my body to keep functioning throughout the day, right? So think about it like, how much gas do you need to drive from here, point A to point B? How much fuel do you need in your body to make it from when you get up in the morning to when you go to bed? And technically, actually, you burn some calories when you're sleeping too. So if you want to lose some weight, just sleep some more. Nope, you didn't hear that from me. So according to the FAO, once again, the average consumption per person in a country like Ethiopia is 1,950 calories. And in another country, same starting letter, Eritrea, it's 1,590. And so both of these countries have been at the center of the food security conversation. And looking at these numbers, we can see why we may need to talk about this, because if Thomas and I are consuming in the mid 2000s each day, and yet there's people in some other countries that are consuming maybe even more than 1,000 calories less than us, why is that? And is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Why do we need to act when we hear those numbers?
Yeah, and it stems back to a concept that we're going to hammer home right now, and it's the idea of 4 pillars of food security, and they include availability, access, utilization, and stability. And all 4 of those work together to ensure that a community, a county, a country, that their food supply is secure. And it can even come back to just a family itself. Like, are they food secure? So we're going to break down these for you in the next couple of minutes.
Starting Thomas, with, I'm going to add a bridge there for you.
Absolutely.
when we talk about being food secure, and we're going to talk about these pillars, at the end of the day, and if we can simplify it as much as we can, it is, are people getting the calories they need? And we can talk about nutrition, and we can talk about vitamins, and we can talk about all this other stuff, right? But the most basic function is, are they getting a calorie that they need? And so we just talked about how many calories we need, and now we're going to talk about how to achieve food security and talk about these pillars. But at the end of the day, that food security, what it really means is, are people getting enough calories? So, Thomas, I hated to interrupt you there, but I want to make sure everybody knows that basic definition is what we're thinking. So, how do we get calories to people? And I think the first way is availability, right? How's that happen?
Absolutely. And sticking with the brief little definition clarification you just made right there, in a simplistic sense, availability is exactly what you think it is. Is the food there? And that's the supply side of food security. It's determined by food production, the stock levels, trade, things like that. It's, in the simplistic sense, is the food there? Is it in existence? And then to stem and follow that, our next pillar is access, which is also semi-self-explanatory. Is there food, and is there an adequate supply of that food that's accessible by the household, by the community? And there's a bunch of concerns about that, based on incomes, expenditures, markets, prices, things like that. But to boil it back to that simplistic example, can people get the food?
Absolutely. And let's give somebody an example. When I walk into a grocery store, let's say, Thomas and I live up here in Pennsylvania, and watermelons are not available all year long. There is definitely a season for those watermelons, especially if we want to get them relatively local. And so, if it's January and I walk into a grocery store, are watermelons available? Okay. And do we have access to them? So, if it's January, there's probably not a whole lot of availability. And inherently tied to that, what you just said, Thomas, I'm not going to have access to those watermelons in January if I'm getting local watermelons, right? And so it's kind of like it's on the back end and the front end, right? Is it there? And then can I get it, right? If it's there. But if it's July, right, I can go to the grocery store and they're going to be there, and I can get them when I go there to the grocery store. But that being said, Thomas, you and I live in a bubble, and I think we're both very aware of that, right? That we can go to the grocery store anytime we want, and we can get a ton of different foods, and for not that much. But when we talk about this stuff, when we talk about it on a global scale, and Roger is going to talk to us a lot more about this on that micro scale. There's places where there is no grocery store, and certain times of the year there is no food. Like, so there, not only is it not available, you can't get access to it because it's not there. And that's something that, I'll be honest with you, I don't know, right? Like I can't remember the last time that I went to the grocery store, and one, it wasn't open because most of our grocery stores around here open 24 hours a day or very late. And two, maybe the most inconvenienced I've ever been is that they're out of bananas, and so I got to get oranges instead. Thomas, I don't know about you, but I feel very fortunate. I've always been in that situation.
Absolutely. And even with the example you just gave, we're incredibly fortunate that in most areas of the United States, when we look at these grocery stores or supermarkets and things like that, they're able to use the markets and the trade that we just talked about in the access portion to get us access to fruits and vegetables that aren't in season in our local area. So like just last week, it's December here, and there's still watermelons in Walmart because they're coming in from, southern states that have a warmer temperature. But as you mentioned, that's a luxury we have here in the United States with the market we have. And even so, there's still families here in the US that, because those specific fruits and vegetables are coming from different areas of the US and they're accruing shipping costs, those prices go up a little bit. So it's a lot easier for them to go and get something that was locally sourced, but that's not always there and available because of the fact that the only way to get watermelons right now is if they're shipped from a different part of the country.
Absolutely. And you don't think that that's a big deal, right? If it's like $1 or $2 different on things, but if you're buying for a whole family, that adds up, right? And after each individual item that you have to buy fills up your cart. I mean, sometimes that's like 50 to 100 to $150 difference, and that actually can be the difference between being able to buy enough food to support your family and not. And at the end of the day, buying enough calories to keep your family running, right? To keep your family functioning every day. Thomas, we've got into a lot of the nuts and bolts here. Can we take a quick second for a commercial break?
Absolutely, yes. Let's get to it.
Conversations surrounding our global food system can be tough, and when we talk about large companies who play a role in the system, the conversation can be even tougher. One way to make things easier is to support conversations like the one we're having, and thanks to Corteva Agriscience, we're able to talk about our food system and help educators have conversations with their students. Corteva is working with producers and consumers to create an agricultural ecosystem that naturally supports people, progress, and the planet. Their goal is to use the latest thinking and technology to grow better food while sustaining the land and conserving resources. Corteva is leading the way in the field by empowering women in agriculture, enabling youth to succeed, and engaging communities to become more vibrant and sustainable. If you want to find out more information about how Corteva is making a difference on farms everywhere by empowering productivity through partnerships, head on over to Corteva.com or connect on social media at Corteva.
All right. Thank you very much for that quick message from Corteva Agriscience. Thomas, where were we?
Well, we're diving back into our 4 pillars, going into the third one, which is utilization. So utilization is, once again, all of these are mostly self-explanatory with how they operate. This one, utilization, is commonly understood as how do you make use of the food? Is it in a usable format? So this can be sufficient energy and nutrient intake by individuals that then effectively results in good care. There's good feeding practices. Food preparation impacts this as well. The diversity of your diet, how the food is distributed in your household. So these are all a whole bunch of different factors that make up utilization, combined with also good biological utilization of the food consumed. Carson, do you have any examples you want to add to that?
Yeah, when I was a little kid, I thought I could eat grass, and be fine, just like I'd watched, other livestock animals do the same. And I quickly realized, one, that I didn't like the taste of grass, and two, my lovely mother was able to let me know that I was not going to be able to get any nutritional quality from that grass because I don't have a rumen. And I didn't know what a rumen was at the time, so I think I went on my merry way. But looking back now, it's like, all right, well, yeah, that makes sense, right? That, like, technically, we got grass all over the place here, but we can't eat it, right? Our bodies can't utilize it. It's just cellulose. We can't break that down into energy like other animals can. And so the same way goes for a lot of the times when we think about the food that's available. For example, we have somebody that is in a dire situation and they're in a famine, and we're going to drop off a bag of rice to them. It's really, really difficult to eat rice unless you boil it in water, right, for it to be edible. And so when we talk about utilization, one, it's okay, can we actually consume it? And two, can our body break that rice down and actually get energy from it? I don't want to get too sciencey here, but sometimes when you're too far gone into starvation, your body actually doesn't have enough energy to even run a metabolism and run the processes of breaking down the food once it gets into your stomach. And so that's a big issue, and that's something everybody always thinks about, right? Because you always think, okay, if you're hungry, you'll just eat something and you'll be okay, right? It'll just be a couple minutes and you'll be okay. Sometimes the stuff gets so bad that it's not that easy, and that's pretty scary. And it all stems from really, at the end of the day, stability. And I think that's our last pillar, right, Thomas?
Absolutely. And talking about the idea of stability, this is interconnected to all 3 of the other pillars. And it's really intertwined with them in the fact that stability focuses on, is the accessibility there? Is the food available there? Is it being utilized properly? And are all 3 of those stable over time? And what factors affect that? So even if you're secure today in all three of those things. Like the food's there, it's of access to you, you're cooking it properly and utilizing it properly. If the stability aspect isn't there, you could be food insecure tomorrow. And there's a whole bunch of things that could set this off. It could be, natural disasters, adverse weather conditions, political instability or unrest. That happens throughout the world, even though it's not something that we like talking about. It is something that happens. And even just economic factors too, like if a family member loses their job, or something happens where somebody's house burns down or things like that, and all their belongings were in there, or different factors like that. All those affect your stability, and that impacts your access, your availability of food, and how you utilize your food.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's kind of like that's the foundational pillar really, that holds up the rest of them, because if you've just suffered a natural disaster, everything's gone. Right. And I think that's a lot of times we don't really think about in some of these places that get really adverse weather. For example, Iowa gets tornadoes, and when a tornado rips through a cornfield, we think, okay, well, good thing it didn't hit any houses, and good thing it didn't hit anything else. But that's corn, right? That's food, and that food's gone. It's I don't know anybody out there that's listening that's knocked over a corn stalk. It's pretty easy to do so, and so a lot of these food systems are really fragile towards weather. And so whether it be a natural disaster or just a lack of availability of water, right? If we don't get rain, we run into issues with drought conditions and how we can grow food. And that's really, the natural side of instability. It can happen pretty quick, right? It's kind of scary how quickly that all can lead to other disasters down the road, because those other pillars are sacrificed because of that one.
Absolutely. And that's our quick synopsis of the 4 pillars of food security. We'll be diving into those more in our GLAGjr Junior modules, so make sure that you check those out as well. And with that, Carson, what are we diving into next?
We're actually going into an interview with Roger Thurow. The interview was fantastic, but it happened to go a little longer than we expected, so this will be in 2 parts. We'll start you off on part 1, leave you on a bit of a cliffhanger, and then head into part 2.
We're joined here today by Mr. Roger Thurow, someone that we know very well at the Global Teach Ag Network. He was our keynote speaker in 2019, and his book, The First 1,000 Days, was actually the book we used for GLAGjr Reads that year. So with that, I just want to take a moment and say thank you, Mr. Thurow, for taking an opportunity, talking with us today, and helping us to invest in high school students as we try to enhance their capacity to talk about food security issues. And with that, I just want to turn it over to you to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, let our speakers know kind of what you do, what your current roles are, and how those might have changed since the last time you came on and were speaking to the Global Teach Ag Network.
Yeah, well, thanks, Thomas, and Carson, thanks for the invitation and having me on this. And yeah, I love the Global Teach Ag Network. And the commitment, the passion of the teachers, passing that on to the students, inspiring them. I'm all about my mantra as a journalist all these years, particularly in writing about food security, has been to outrage and inspire. Outrage on just the appalling realities of hunger and malnutrition and food security in our world, but then the inspire that this is something that is one of our great challenges in the world that we can actually do something about. We know what to do. It's just a matter of having the will, not just the political will, but the public will as well. And that's where the teachers and the efforts with the students then become so important. And the whole inspire aspect inside of it is so vitally crucial for us to finally conquer hunger and malnutrition. So great to be with you guys again, and to be communicating with all our great and valiant teachers out there. And yeah, so I was a reporter with the Wall Street Journal for 30 years, 20 of them as a foreign correspondent. And it was while doing the foreign corresponding, I kind of look back at my career and figure that all of that basically led me to the journalism that I do today, which is really focused on and centered on writing about food security, hunger, malnutrition. Again, not only the realities of it, but what we can do to conquer it. And yeah, through hopefully this 1-2 combination and 1-2 punch of outrage of our realities, that we brought this medieval suffering with us into the 21st century. Now during the pandemic, we see kind of the how quickly the health crisis turned into a hunger crisis, a nutrition crisis. We see that all over the world, and including the United States. I mean, it's right in front of us here with the shocking increase in demand at our food banks and food pantries, and the long lines that we're seeing, and the huge kind of epic traffic jams at what's become kind of drive-through bread lines in our country. And people are shocked at that, but should we really be? Because that hunger has always abided and persisted in the United States. It's part of our history going back to the Jamestown settlement. And so, I think that's one of the big things that I try to communicate in the writing, and we have seen this then so much then come into play during the pandemic, is there's no over there anymore. These issues they touch all of us. And so, you mentioned the First 1,000 Days book, that a hungry child anywhere in the world, a malnourished child anywhere in the world, becomes a malnourished child everywhere, because the impact of that, the economic impact, the moral aspect about it, it knows no bounds of place or time. It all redounds to each and every one of us and impacts us in some way. And so, to focus on those issues, I'm very grateful for this opportunity, and to speak with you guys, and then also all the teachers there, and what you do to explain, to motivate, and to rally the passion for these issues.
So Roger, you bring up a really good point, and something that I forget all the time, right? That a lot of these issues are in our backyard, and we may not see over the fence sometimes, to experience those and understand those, right? Like if we're in our bubble, we're in our bubble, we don't see outside of it. I would love to hear a little bit more about an example where you have seen an issue abroad. You've seen anecdotal evidence for a very specific food security issue, and you've seen a mirror of that back here at home. So where are we seeing this happening abroad as well as in our backyard?
Right. Thank you for that. And so I've been fortunate, in some of the storytelling, to be able to do it over time, which is something we as journalists don't do all that well. I think it's also a problem in academic research, because grants are only for a limited period of time to study something, to do the research. So you might get into something for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years or something, and then, well, whatever happened to them, or what became of the people that we were studying or focusing our research on? Except only in few cases, or reasonably rare cases, that researchers are able to follow those stories. The one that I'm thinking of in particular, Carson, was my first encounter then was in the famine in Ethiopia of 2003. It was the first famine of the 21st century, the first great hunger crisis of this new millennium of ours. 14 million people were on the doorstep of starvation in Ethiopia that year, surviving, if they were going to survive at all, thanks to food aid that was being distributed by the World Food Program, which won a Nobel Peace Prize this year for its tremendous and heroic efforts throughout its fantastic history. And a lot of that food aid then coming from the United States and from farmers in America. And so imagine that, 14 million people, 3 years into this glorious new century of ours, this new millennium of ours, that we had brought this, as I said, this medieval suffering with us into the 21st century. And, had seen kind of in my previous reporting for the Wall Street Journal, that, and then really came into focus then in the Ethiopia in 2003, the poorest people are smallholder, or the hungriest people in the world are smallholder farmers, and how not only drought and other natural disasters that then can affect them, pests and disease and drought and weather conditions and climatic aspects, but also failures of the market, distribution failures, failures of governance, failures of infrastructure, how all that can combine. And it's basically then the smallholder farmers that are really bearing the brunt of that. And so in Ethiopia in 2003, was meeting with the World Food Program folks in their office in the capital, Addis Ababa. They were talking about the extent of the famine in Ethiopia and where their relief efforts were going on. I would be traveling with them in subsequent days to some of the hunger hotspots. And one of the WFP people said then, and I'll never forget this, had unfurled a huge map of Ethiopia and then one of Africa, kind of where, because it was not only in Ethiopia, it was throughout the Horn of Africa, down the east coast of Africa, into southern Africa. There's this huge hunger crisis on the continent. And he told me, Roger, looking into the eyes of someone dying of hunger becomes a disease of the soul. Because what you see is that nobody should be dying of hunger, particularly not now, not in the 21st century. I'm like, disease of the soul. Like, what's he talking about? You're prepared for, you have your yellow fever shots. You're on the lookout for kind of, cholera epidemics, or it's in the meningitis belt, so kind of anything going on that front. So you're cognizant of all these kind of physical ailments and possibilities. But what is this disease of the soul that he's talking about? So the next day, then we were in one of the famine and hunger hotspots south of Addis. It was an area that hadn't been impacted too severely by famine in the past, and some of the epic famines that had also the main one that so many people remember in 84, 85, which resulted in the We Are the World and this kind of epic hand-holding around the world that, my goodness, what's happening here? This should never happen again. Well, here we were 19 years later, and it was happening again. And so we were in this area, south of Addis, came to a field that was normally a market area where farmers would bring their produce for sale and their surplus crops. But now it had been turned into a huge maze of emergency feeding tents that had been set up. And each of those tents was filled with dozens upon dozens of children, literally on the doorstep of starvation.
At this point, Roger goes on to explain in great detail the exact accounts of what he saw over in Ethiopia. And once again, this was a little bit of a longer conversation, so we wanted to split it up into two parts. You just heard part one, and if you'll tune back in for part two, we'll pick up the conversation in one of those tents.